Hello and welcome to episode 2 of So You Tried to Kill Yourself, Now What? I'm your host, Olivia Catherine. Let me just start off by saying, wow. That's it, just wow. I don't even know where to begin this episode, honestly, except to say thank you. The outpouring of love, stories, and connection from episode 1 have left me feeling absolutely speechless. The messages, the feedback, the courage of people sharing their own journeys, survivors, those who've lost someone to suicide, and everyone in between, it's so overwhelming in the most beautiful of ways. To everyone who has reached out to say that this podcast has already made you feel seen, heard, or less alone, thank you. That is exactly why I started this podcast, and to know that the conversation is already starting so strongly, I honestly have no words. Anyone who's ever known me in real life, please pick up your jaw off the floor right now. But yes, we can relish in the fact that I, Olivia Catherine, have no words. But here's the thing. I almost didn't go through with this podcast. I didn't just doubt my ability to make an impact. I doubted that anyone would even want to listen to me. I doubted my gut feeling that this was the right next best step. I doubted my intentions because, you know what? I did not want this to come off as a selfish space for me to just trauma dump. Every limiting belief that I had ever had surfaced before I hit that publish button. I questioned if I was enough, if my story mattered, if this could actually help anyone. But holy shit, here we are. It's episode 2, and it's because of you. Your love, your support, your stories, and your encouragement. This is why I pushed through every single doubt. So let's keep this momentum going. Let's keep having these conversations, sharing our stories, and showing up for ourselves and each other. Because these conversations matter now more than ever, and we're just getting started. This week, we're diving into a tough but necessary topic, the lead up to an attempt and what comes after. For so many of us, these moments aren't isolated. They're not a single event we can just pinpoint and say, that's the reason. No. They're often the result of layers upon layers upon layers of compounding trauma, unaddressed pain, mental health struggles, and more. But, if I'm being honest, part of the stigma around this lead-up comes from how it's portrayed in the media. Because let's be real, most of the time, books, TV shows, and movies get it completely wrong. Attempts are often, and most frequently, severely dramatized for shock value, or condensed into a single aha moment that just doesn't reflect the reality of what many of us have experienced. Now don't get me wrong, if there's one thing that almost got it right, it's 13 Reasons Why. The way it depicted suicide as the result of compounding trauma resonated with a lot of people, myself included. But even then, it's not the full picture. The main character in 13 Reasons Why completed suicide. And that's not our story. We are survivors. And that means the conversation looks totally different for us. It's not about what's been left behind, it's about what we carry forward, the weight of our experiences, and how we begin to rebuild. But I also want to acknowledge something important. Our loved ones. For many of them, the lead up to an attempt is invisible. They don't always see the compounding pain that we've endured. They don't always know what we're carrying. And sometimes a single comment from them might feel like the straw that broke the camel's back. But here's the thing, they are not responsible for knowing every detail of our struggles. And as a survivor, I've made it my mission to speak more openly when I'm feeling certain ways. But not just for myself, but for the people around me who care, who want to help, and who don't deserve to be left in the dark. Because silence kills. And breaking that silence is the first step towards breaking the stigma. This episode is not about glorifying or romanticizing the lead up to any attempt, okay? It is about understanding it, breaking it down piece by piece to shine a light on what so many of us have experienced, but rarely feel safe enough to talk about. That being said, I want to acknowledge that the topic today is very heavy. We'll be diving into the factors that often contribute to an attempt, things like mental health struggles, trauma, and burnout. And, of course, the emotional aftermath that comes with surviving. This conversation is not meant to trigger or overwhelm anyone. Someone reached out to me after episode 1, and she mentioned how important it is for me to remind listeners to take care of themselves during these conversations, and I honestly could not agree more. So if you're listening and this topic feels like it's too much right now, please know that it's okay to pause. Save this episode. Come back to it when you're ready, or skip it altogether if that's what you need to protect your mental health. Your well-being matters more than anything. This podcast is meant to be a safe space, and that includes giving yourself permission to step away when something feels too heavy. For those who feel ready to dive in, we're going to unpack some of those factors and talk about what happens next. What does the emotional aftermath look like? How do we navigate feelings of shame, guilt, anger, or even grief? But most importantly, how do we take those first steps towards healing? Are you ready? Let's dive in. Let me start by saying this as loudly and as clearly as humanly possible. These moments often build up over time. Okay? I'm going to say it one more time now. These moments often build up over time. They're not spontaneous, out-of-nowhere events, even if they look that way from the outside. Often, the moment that pushes someone over the edge, that straw that broke the camel's back, it might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of everything someone has been silently struggling with. I had a conversation with my fiancé about this podcast, and he admitted something to me that really stuck with me. After my last attempt in 2020, and by the way, I may have misspoken in episode 1 when I said 2012. If I did, that was an error. It was 2020. But he felt like he had to walk on eggshells around me because he didn't want to set me off again. And you know what? That made me realize that from the outside, that's exactly how it must look. But the truth is, it wasn't even the fight we had that night that caused my attempt. To me, that fight was just the fire that lit the pile of shit that I had been dealing with for months, even years. To be honest, it could have been anything that lit that pile of shit on fire. But on the outside, people don't see the buildup. They only see the final straw. So let's talk about some of those contributing factors. Like, yes, mental health conditions such as depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, or PTSD come with a heightened risk of suicidal thoughts or attempts. But here's the thing. Those diagnoses are not the reason someone tries to end their life. Do they help in securing treatment like medication or therapy? Absolutely. For me, getting diagnosed with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and PTSD helped me access the tools I needed to stabilize. But a diagnosis doesn't explain the entire picture. And it's important to note, not everybody who does die by suicide or survives an attempt has a diagnosable mental health condition. But then there's everything that no one talks about. The external pressures like burnout, trauma, financial stress, relationship struggles, or the internal battles like feelings of inadequacy, hopelessness, or believing you're a burden. Let's be honest, when someone asks, "What's up?" how many times do we actually feel safe enough to answer honestly? And in my experience, more than half the time it's just a courtesy and not because people actually care. So what does all of this look like for a 13-year-old? That's how old I was during my first attempt. You might be thinking, what could a 13-year-old possibly hate so much about their life that they wanted to leave their earth? Let me share a glimpse. At 11, a family member told anyone who would listen that I had tried to poison her tea. I was sexually assaulted by someone I considered my hero. One of my parents put me and my siblings in foster care and told everyone else that our other parent was dead. I watched family members neglect their own mental and physical health, and I had to care for them when they couldn't care for themselves. A babysitter slit her wrist in front of me and told me not to tell anyone. I was bullied endlessly by family, peers, and even strangers online. And I was told daily by people close to me to go kill myself. All of this and more happened before I was 13. And the truth is, these lead-ups aren't always about even getting back at someone or even seeking attention. For me, they were about trying to quiet the storm raging inside my mind. And sometimes, ironically, the lead-up to the attempt itself felt like the calmest part, the eye of the storm. Fast forward to my most recent attempt in 2020. That year, I was coping with the loss of my role as a sister mom for the first time, and I coped by drinking heavily. I was dealing with abuse on all fronts, from the child welfare system, family, people I trusted, even friends. Burnout was real too. I had just started my first job in child and youth care, working overnight shifts while unknowingly managing undiagnosed narcolepsy. And on top of that, my relationship with my fiancé was at its breaking point. We were constantly fighting. One fight even got physical, not out of malice, but because he tried to get me out of his way and didn't realize his strength. But still, it was a breaking point for us. Add in financial stress, the pandemic, and everything else, it was just the perfect storm. That night, after another fight with my fiancé, I left to go get drunk. In my mind, though, I wasn't planning an attempt. I just wanted to drink, bleed, and fall asleep. But I had been carrying so much for so long, and I wasn't equipped to process it all. The truth is, my last attempt didn't even register as an attempt at the time. I woke up in the ER, annoyed that I was alive, and that's when it hit me. The lead up to an attempt isn't one thing. It's everything. Now I think it's time we talk about what comes after. When I reflect on my attempts, there's one thought that comes up every single time. Shit, I'm still here. And then life just went back to business as usual. But here's the truth. I was unsatisfied. I tried again and again and again. And as I share this with you now, I can admit something I've never said out loud before. The only reason I'm still here is because of that welfare check. If my fiancé hadn't made that call, I wouldn't have been found. My friend who was asleep only woke up because the police were knocking at her door. I reflect on that night often. I honestly hated my fiancé for calling the police. I hated him for trying to save me because in that moment, I didn't want to be saved. I remember lying in the ER crying because I felt like a stupid damsel in distress. I was angry. I was angry at him. I was angry at myself. I was angry that I was in the hospital. I was angry that I was probably getting formed. I was angry because I wasn't successful. And that was devastating. I was devastated. I was devastated that I had done that at someone else's house, let alone my own. I was even devastated to wake up alive. And then I just felt numb. You see, the irony is that I was doing everything right by the book. Therapy, medications, diagnoses. I was checking all of the boxes. So when the psychiatrist told me that night that there was nothing else that they could suggest, I was furious. What do you mean there's nothing more you can do for me? And that was the moment I realized that no one could actually save me but me. That realization was a turning point. I had a choice to make. I could accept that I was a lost cause and go back to business as usual with another attempt waiting down the line, or I could challenge that. Well, that night, I chose to challenge it. Now, I wish I could tell you that it was the end of it, that I left the ER and everything magically got better. It didn't. Healing is a process, and surviving comes with its own emotional aftermath, one that's messy, non-linear, and extremely personal. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have felt it all over the past few years. I have felt shame, feeling like I have failed. I have felt guilt, worrying about how my actions have affected others. I felt kind of like a survivor's guilt, like knowing that I'm still here, but still feeling like I failed the people around me. I felt defeat and sorrow and emptiness and hopelessness and worthlessness. The emotions mimic stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But not in any particular order, and absolutely not with a clear timeline. And surviving isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily choice to keep moving forward even when it feels impossible. Now, fast forward to November 2023. I found myself in a similar situation, coping with the loss of my role as a sister mom yet again. I started drinking again after that, and I was still dealing with abuse from all directions: family, friends, again the child welfare system. And burnout was at an all-time high, especially with my new ADHD and autism diagnoses being added to the mix. Life felt unbearable. And then one night, as I stood near the highway overpass by my house on a walk one evening, I had a very vivid, impulsive thought. What if I just jump? But this time, I stopped myself. This time, I realized I had a choice to make. I could repeat what happened in 2020, or I could make a better choice. Let's talk about what that better choice looks like. When I had that intrusive thought in 2023, the one that made me grip the railing of the overpass tightly, it felt all too familiar. It was like 2020 all over again. I thought I just want to drink, bleed, and sleep. But that thought made me realize something so important. No matter what you do, the thoughts don't just disappear forever. That realization in itself is both sobering and empowering. Because while the thoughts haven't gone away entirely, they've decreased significantly. I don't look at something and instantly think of all the ways it could end my life as often, or honestly, at all anymore. I don't think about wanting to die nearly as much as I used to. But in 2023, when those thoughts returned, it broke me. I thought, is this how life is going to be forever until I die? Am I going to be stuck in the cycle of wanting to end my life for as long as I live? And that thought alone was devastating. Because honestly, no one should live like that. It's heartbreaking to even admit how much I hated the thought of being alive. So as I stood there on that overpass watching traffic whip by me underneath, gripping the railing like it was the only thing tethering me to this world, I cried. And I cried. And I cried. And then I did something I hadn't done before. I reached out in that moment. I texted the suicide hotline, and with their help, I made it through the night. And the next day, when those thoughts came back, I found myself hiding in the forest behind my work during my break. I again had felt isolated, I felt worthless, and like I just couldn't escape the spiral. I stared into the creek and imagined what it would feel like to drown. And then, out of nowhere, a random man stopped to talk to me. He didn't ask me about my tears or my obvious distress. He just simply smiled, showed me kindness, and distracted me for a moment. And then he went on his very merry way. But that brief interaction broke me out of my trance-like state. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in what felt like years. Yes, things are bad, but not all things. That moment shifted something in me. It didn't magically fix everything, but it planted a seed. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there's still light, no matter how small or fleeting it feels. And that's when I started to realize the importance of this podcast. If someone had told me back in 2020 that the thoughts might return, I could have prepared myself for better. I could have equipped myself with the tools, support systems, and strategies for when the darkness came back. Because it's not about pretending these thoughts won't come. It's about knowing how to face them when they do. Understanding these patterns can help survivors feel less alone. It's a reminder that what you're feeling isn't a personal failure. It's a part of the process. And when we talk about these patterns openly, we take away their power. Because silence kills. Starting these conversations, even when it feels impossible, is one of the bravest things that you can do. It's not easy to say, I'm not okay, or to reach out when everything inside you feels broken. But those small acts of connection, texting a hotline, confiding in a friend, or even letting a stranger's kindness distract you, can be the difference between giving up and holding on. You don't have to do this alone. This podcast exists to remind you of that. You are not alone in your thoughts, your pain, or your journey. And even when the darkness feels overwhelming, there are people, tools, and moments that can help you make it through. Let's talk about how to start equipping ourselves for those moments, so we're ready for when they come. As we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with some actionable reflections, steps that have helped me navigate the aftermath of an attempt, and that I hope they can help you too. So let's start here. It's okay to feel shame, anger, grief, or even numbness. Whatever emotions you're experiencing, they're valid. You don't have to justify them to anyone, not even yourself. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that emotions aren't something we fix. They're something we feel. And feeling them doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. So if you're sitting with those feelings right now, give yourself permission to name them, write them down, say them out loud, or just acknowledge them silently. You don't have to fight them alone. Reaching out for help can feel impossible when you're in the thick of it. Trust me, I know. But it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes it's the smallest steps that make the biggest difference. Text a friend, write in a journal, Google a local support group, call or text a hotline. These small steps can act like a lifeline, even if they feel insignificant in the moment. For me, texting that suicide hotline in 2023 was a small step that saved my life. And that random man in the forest, his small act of kindness gave me a perspective shift I desperately needed. Those small steps matter. And here's a truth you may not hear often enough. Surviving takes strength. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now, the fact that you are here listening to this and showing up for yourself in any way, that's resilience. So celebrate those small victories. Did you get out of bed today? Did you drink water? Did you go for a walk, even just to the end of your driveway? Those are all wins, and they deserve to be acknowledged. The world doesn't always celebrate these things, but we're not here to live up to the world's expectations. Celebrate your wins, no matter how small they may seem. And remember, healing isn't linear, and it is not instant. There will be days when it feels like you're just taking 2 steps forwards and 3 steps back. That's okay. Focus on today, just today. Ask yourself, what's one thing I can do to take care of myself right now? Maybe it's breathing deeply, maybe it's eating a snack, or maybe it's simply resting. The big picture can feel overwhelming, but when you break it down into one day or even one moment at a time, it becomes manageable. I want to leave you with something to think about. What's one thing you've done, big or small, that has helped you through a dark moment? Maybe it was reaching out to a friend. Maybe it was simply putting your feet on the floor and getting out of bed. Whatever it was, hold on to that. Write it down if you can. Those are the moments that remind us of our strength even when we feel weak. Remember, you are not alone. Healing is fucking hard, but you don't have to navigate it by yourself. Take these steps one at a time and give yourself grace along the way. As we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one important reminder, darling. You are not alone. The shame, the guilt, the anger, they don't define you. What defines you is the fact that you're here, you're listening, and you're choosing to take the next step, no matter how small. And that next step doesn't have to be monumental. It could be reaching out to a friend or a loved one to let them know how you're feeling. It could be journaling your thoughts, even if it's just a single sentence. It could be drinking a glass of water, taking that deep breath you're holding right now. It could be listening to this podcast again, or finding another resource that resonates with you. It could even just be simply sitting with your emotions and letting yourself feel them without judgment. But remember, every step, no matter how small, is a step forward. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for holding space for these conversations, and thank you for showing up for yourself today. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. If there's one thing I want you to leave this podcast feeling, it's hope. Hope that things can and will get better. Hope that you are stronger than you think. And hope that even when it feels impossible, you have the ability to keep going. I am so deeply grateful for this growing community, for each and every one of you who listens, who shares, and who shows up. Together we're breaking the silence, rewriting the narrative, and proving that our stories aren't over yet. Next week we'll be diving into a topic I think we all need to hear: managing bad days when they feel impossible. Because let's face it, bad days happen and they can do and will feel overwhelming. But we're going to talk about ways to navigate them so you can take care of yourself when things feel heavy. Until then, take care of yourself, babe. Be gentle with yourself, and remember, your story isn't over yet. I love you, and you matter, my friend.